Our series this month is Freedom and Justice. And there is no freedom without justice. Anything short of justice is just those in power getting to do what they want. These last 3 weeks, Bonnie and I had a magnificent time, and it was a dream-like experience to visit these places. And as I mentioned earlier, while you mean a great deal to me, I was able to be deeply in vacation mode, that I didn't think a whole lot about us here. I needed to be off and rest. But you all came flooding back to me in a most unlikely way. Unlikely, but deeply meaningful way to me, which is laughter. And Jeff, just hang on for the prompt. I'll cue you. I saw this sticker while walking with the group and laughed out loud. Several people who we were traveling with had come to learn that Bonnie and I are both pastors. And we're not sure how to react to this in my presence, or how to take the fact that I was laughing really hard and said, my church would love this. Let's see the picture. Isn't that the best? Words to live by. And I've come to learn that there's like a company that does T-shirts with this and a whole thing. And what was so great is people weren't sure what to do with us, because they knew clergy and we just didn't quite fit the mold of their preconceived notions, to the point where somebody who we became sort of tour friends with, his name is Pandy, and he and his wife immigrated from Albania years ago, made a life in New York. He was a school janitor. She's an accountant. Their kids are both engineers now. And he was talking about this, and he says, I don't believe in God. I don't pray, but maybe you could change my mind. And I thought, well, that's something. That's something. Now, our travels to the eastern part of the Danube, we visited towns in Romania, Bulgaria, Serbia, Croatia, and Hungary. We got to go through the largest lock on the Danube between Serbia and Romania, which was built during the communist era by the two communist dictatorships in partnership to make this dam possible. They failed, however, to include a fish ladder, which has severely impacted the population of sturgeon, a very important resource to family life, culture, and industry in that area. And it still causes damage today. We learned through these incredible scholars who served as tour guides, many of whom have advanced degrees in their fields, who are also local, who are from those towns and shared personal stories and experiences that related to the history they were sharing with us. And we saw incredible beauty and bounty that the earth in that part of the world offers. Things grow. Things just grow, and it's fabulous. We began in Bucharest, Romania. We toured the city and the area and learned from our tour guide what life was like during the brutal dictatorship of Ceausescu. A time when nearly 20% of the population were in the secret police, betraying family trusts, friends, colleagues. A time when you could not trust anyone, where trust is still nearly impossible. People would disappear regularly. Many never reappeared. Some reappeared years later without explanation, without story sharing of where they were or what happened. They just reappeared. And out of fear, no one asked. No one asked. Their rations under this brutal dictatorship were minimal: bread and salami, while buildings, one second only in size to our own Pentagon, were built for no apparent reason other than ego. People were taken from their family farms and moved into what they call matchbox apartments built in the brutalist architecture style to work in factories or to work on the land their families owned for generations and not benefit from the fruits of their labor. Romania and Romanians, despite their brilliance and beauty and bountiful natural resources, struggle to keep pace with neighboring nations. And in the midst of all of this, there are children laughing, playing together, learning about their heritage, reviving traditional music and dance, relearning their language and culture. Adults and elders work to reclaim and repossess their childhood memories. The young, however, look to horizons of possibility that are elsewhere. And there's a longing to create an environment where the young will look at home as a possible place for a better life. And then we floated across the Danube to Bulgaria. Bulgarians suffered under a far less brutal regime during the Cold War era and are also still emerging from decades of hostilities, struggling to rebuild lives and create opportunities, not merely for survival, but as shared, a common theme was so that their young will see home as a place of possibility and a good future, to revive what it means to be Romanian, Bulgarian, Serbian, Croatian. But the lure of financial success, functional infrastructure, national security that are a mere border crossing or two away, that lure is strong. And one of the things that came clear to us very quickly is that we as people find ways to hold on to who we are, to hold on to the lives of our ancestors and offer something to future generations. And in this part of the world, one of those things is what the Bulgarians call rakia or rakia. This is a strong spirit that is distilled, not town by town, but home by home, family by family, using what they grow in their own yards. And it is a drink that has the kick of a horse and really strong flavor. And some of the wisdom they shared with us, you need to start your day with a little bit of this. Because anything bad you had the day before, this will kill it. And it will give you energy and clarity. So many do start their day with a shot of rakia. And then at the end of the day, they gather to recap the goings on, to celebrate with it at special times, to mourn with it in sadness. And it is likely the one thing through all the invasions and attacks and ups and downs, the one thing that they could count on making for themselves that was their own. And in drinking it with reverence and celebration, the rakia connects them to all other Bulgarians who have ever existed. And whatever the Bulgarian future holds, it will be there. Now, the term rakia is used in Bulgaria, Serbia, and Croatia. It's basically the same drink. In Romania, essentially the same drink is called suica, And in Hungary, it is palinka. Basically the same distilled drink offered by the branches and vines that are growing at arm's reach. And it's a special kind of joy to drink with those intimately and generationally tied to the land and the processes and the secrets of family recipes. You can see in the faces of folks who share this with you the anticipation of what you're going to think, because it is a way of connecting you, a stranger, a visitor, a guest, with the family and with generations. And when you drink, you can taste it. And the more you drink, the more you love people. Now, in our day and age in Sacramento, California, we attempt to reach for this kind of connection to land, tradition, and each other with things like microbreweries and farm-to-fork restaurants. All wonderful ideas and noble attempts, but much of the world operates like this as a way of living, not to capture or capitalize on a trend. We've gotten so distant from it, we gravitate to manufactured replicas because the pull of the connection to the earth and ancestry is strong, and we are desperately trying in our context to do what we can to respond to that call. Now, for those of you who are also Cold War kids like me, Gen Xers and other generations, we were filled with so much American propaganda about, quote, those awful communist countries behind the Iron Curtain. And true, there were some awful things that happened. But all the people who lived behind the Iron Curtain weren't our enemies. They were people just trying to make a way like we are. And our propaganda machine worked not only to vilify them, but to prop up America, capitalism, democracy, and the American way as the supreme way of life. Now, one of the stories I heard growing up many times was about an individual who defected from the then Soviet Union. And as part of his assimilation to life in the U.S., his handlers, his guides, took him grocery shopping after a couple of weeks of debrief. And you may have heard a version of this story yourselves. And while in the grocery store, he was overwhelmed with all the different foods, and even more so overwhelmed that there were so many varieties of each food. And in the coffee aisle, he became physically overwhelmed and passed out. Then the adults, in my experience, these agents of propaganda in my youth, usually followed up the story with, look how great a country we are. We have so many choices. We have an abundance of things. America, capitalism, the best. We should be proud. You know, as kids, you buy into that because people are passionate, and you think, how awful that there was so little somewhere else that our abundance caused someone to pass out. And I've heard other folks in my generation talk about their experience hearing similar stories, and the spin the adults put on that was, we're lucky. We are lucky. And we too come from places and people that once struggled. Now, when I buy cereal or coffee or whatever, I pretty much get the same thing every time. Anybody else in that same boat? Like, you go through the aisles, everything that's not your thing is pretty much invisible, right? Your mind is so focused on your color label and the font and everything, and you just go pick it up and move on. How many of you like to try different things all the time? Okay, there's a couple of you adventurous types out here. I mean, I try other things just to find what my thing's going to be, and then I'm done. You know, it's all good. But none of this, like the varieties, the shades and flavors and infusions in my favorite hot morning beverage, aren't what's important. But that first morning sip, taking in a breath to think about the day ahead. It almost doesn't matter what's in the cup. But sometimes it can feel like it does. Now, Stalinist communism and corporatist capitalism are both brutal and dehumanizing systems in their own ways. The truth is, neither system cares about your wellness or my wellness, your wholeness or my wholeness. And yet our propaganda machine was so effective that within me is sustained a sliver idea that the freedom to choose from so many choices, to choose my favorite award-winning coffee bean out of many award-winning beans, that my choice as a consumer is necessary for my morning sip to be meaningful. You all probably know somebody whose morning, whose whole day or whole week was ruined because their foam to espresso ratio was off. Now, if you don't know that someone somewhere, you probably are that someone somewhere. Our minds, our rituals, our metrics for gauging purpose and joy have all been colonized by corporate capitalism. And the rest of the world, with its beauty and its history and its culture and music, are desperately trying to keep up with us, with the great empire of today, the USA, all while knowing they put at risk what truly matters most. And we in strong GDP industrialized powers, we just keep accelerating towards the climate cliff because being consumers has become our national purpose, maybe even our religion. The corporate capitalist propaganda machine with its heavily funded and skilled marketing departments are monumentally effective to the point we often feel powerless, overwhelmed, and sometimes we too get overwhelmed and pass out. And we just acquiesce to survive. The battle between pursuit of the soul's purpose and the pursuit of profit has been raging for millennia. Our text reveals that in a painfully clear way. One day on our way to the place of prayer, a slave girl ran into us. I will call her Sandra. Sandra was a psychic, and with her fortune-telling, gifts of natural resources, Sandra made a lot of money for the people who owned her. Sandra started following Paul around, calling everyone's attention to us by yelling out, "These men are working for the Most High God." Now, to me, it sounds like Sandra is a great hype man for Paul and his ministry, but most likely because Paul was irritated, she was doing this in a way of mockery and agitation, not affirmation and support. Because Sandra, despite her exploited status, supported a system that was keeping her down because her survival depended on it. And maybe for Sandra, that life was better than the alternatives. So I hold no blame for Sandra, but for those who have the power to uplift or subvert systems of oppression and exploitation. So Paul turned to Sandra and commanded, "Come out out in the name of Jesus Christ, and it was gone. Now, I know we progressives, we're not really into exorcisms, but we most certainly need a way to expel the greed-driven demons of consumerisms from out of our minds and out of our hearts. The next sentences from our passage read like contemporary headlines. When her owners saw that their lucrative little business was suddenly bankrupt, they went after Paul and Silas, roughed them up, dragged them into the market square. Then the police arrested them, not the attackers, but the attacked, and put them into a court with the accusation, "These men are disturbing the peace. Dangerous Jewish agitators." Anti-Semitism, not a new phenomenon either. Subverting our Roman law and order. The crowd was bloodthirsty. The judges ordered jail. Not just jail, but shackles in a maximum security cell. Our tour guide in Belgrade, Serbia, was Miloš. He introduced himself by saying, "My name is Miloš. It's spelled M-I-L-O-S." He has an encyclopedic and Google speed level recall and knowledge. And he said that when Serbia was a part of Yugoslavia under the rule of Tito, that their communism wasn't as bad as other places. They had some freedom of movement, etc., and to travel and to buy goods from many places. And Tito was a jet-setting, Hollywood elbow-rubbing type. And Tito and Stalin, after all, didn't really like each other. And Miloš said, "Of course we vilify Stalin. He was a bad dude who, by some estimations, caused the death of 7 million people through direct violence or policy. Of course Stalin is a bad guy. And Tito is a pretty good guy. He only murdered about 200,000. And he let us have nice things." That's humor in Serbia, in case you weren't sure. Having an awareness of the propaganda we have been subject to is important. It is necessary, but awareness is not an answer. Recognizing we benefit from and are complicit in structures and systems that harm people and the planet for our comfort, convenience, and security is not the answer in and of itself. So now what? In his book, there's some wisdom that I think works here. In his book, Across That Bridge, A Vision for Change and the Future of America, John Lewis says, "Ours is not the struggle of one day, 1 week, or 1 year. Ours is not the struggle of one judicial appointment or presidential term." Let me say that again. This is tough. Ours is not the struggle of one judicial appointment or presidential term. Ours is the struggle of a lifetime, or maybe even many lifetimes. And each one of us in every generation must do our part. And I think one small part of our part came to me on this trip. In Croatia, in a home of a local who had lived there for a long time. Our host was a single woman whose husband had died some years ago. And in the time of Serbian aggression towards Croatia, soldiers came across the river to her town, knocked on her door and said, "You have 30 minutes to leave, or else." And or else means they get shot in the street out front. She and her husband gathered some things from their newly built home as a married couple and went. And they were away for 7 years. While they were away, their town was virtually abandoned. Their home was taken over by nature. When they returned, they couldn't access the house from the street. The brush had gotten too thick. So they got on a raft, kind of moved along the river to find the thinnest point, the point where the brush was the thinnest, and they hacked their way into the back door of the house. And as they got inside, they they saw that a tree had grown from inside the house in their dining room through the roof. And in their recovery process, they then put a light in that hole where the tree once grew. And that light was on, and we were under it at her table. And there we were, this small group of strangers in her home, gathered around her table, eating cakes and pastry made by her own hands from the fruit of her own trees, and drinking her family's rakia, or some blueberry juice. As we sat there together around her table, I thought about communion. And I thought, we sitting here are probably all over the spectrum of religions, no religion, even anti-religion, and yet we are communing together at the table of this gracious host who we don't really know, but who has opened her home, invited us to sit down where her family sits and eats and celebrates. We listened intently to our host as she shared about her life, the struggles and the joys of having two adult daughters who live close by. We listened intently to the perspectives of our 24-year-old language interpreter, who is herself pursuing higher education and, like so many, plans to leave for greener pastures and more financial opportunity. We communed, and for me, in a most personal and profound way, it was one of the holiest communions that I've ever received. Ours is not the struggle of one day, 1 week, or 1 year. Ours is not the struggle of one judicial appointment or presidential term. Ours is the struggle of a lifetime, or maybe even many lifetimes. And each one of us, in every generation, must do our part. And I offer to you for consideration that part of our part in this generation is to be in communion with each other and all people. For us to gather around cakes and pastries and bread and drinks of blueberry juice or rakia. Make the time. Offer invitations. Accept invitations. Exploitation for profit is all around us. Sitting together around the table, listening to and learning from each other is how we fight it. Amen.